This week's US CQM Forecast Alert is economists should focus on the income side as well as the expenditure side. Exported and imported goods in July were significantly different from last week's their ADIMA forecast, leading to a sharp contraction in the trade deficit and a significant upward revision to economic growth on the expenditure side. Real GDP growth rate was minus 0.58% in 2022 Q2, but real GDI growth rate was 1.4%. The statistical discrepancy widened to 3.9% of GDP. Economists should not ignore the income side in making economic judgment. After all, this week's CQM sharply revised economic growth rate up to 3.17% on the expenditure side. The income side was also revised upward to 0.60%, and the forecast of negative growth disappeared. The economy is picking up in August. Inflation has fallen to around 4%. Similar to CQM, the PCA forecast showed that the economy is picking up somewhat in August. Inflation has fallen to nearly 5%. Looking at the economic growth rate in terms of GDP in 2022 Q1 and Q2, the US economy is technically in recession. But looking at them in terms of GDI, we cannot technically call it a recession. The important thing is to recognize that the US economy deteriorated rapidly in 2022 Q1 and Q2. In making economic judgment, economists should focus on the GDO of average economic growth rate on both the expenditure and income side. The statistical discrepancy has now widened to 3.93% of GDP. Conclusions from this week's CQM Forecast Alert. First, economic growth on the expenditure side was revised significantly upward, as July exported and imported goods differed significantly from their ADIMA forecast. Second, in August, the economy has showed signs of recovery, and the inflation rate was on a downward trend. Third, the biggest uncertainty for economic judgment is the important export of goods in August. Fourth, the US economy began to recover from August based on the PCA forecast and the average economic growth rate on both the expenditure and income sides. It can be said the economic growth rate is 1% to 2% for the time being. This slide contains additional information about this week's detailed CQM forecast, the original developer of CQM, and CQM theory papers.